tips, especially with the squat, that you could potentially give that would improve a person's lift?
The squat, I'd say, probably has the most options or the most variables. So I think if it's, let's say it's powerlifting, it would be a good idea to figure out which type of squat you would be competing in. So so that there's raw sleeves or bare knee, raw wraps, and then you've got the equipped route, which is probably not anywhere near as many people looking to get into that immediately. So I'd say figure out if you want to squat in wraps or not, and then it's going to be a case of pretty much assessing your kind of genetic makeup and just trying to minimize the trial and error period of what the most efficient technique and stance and position, etc., is going to be for that person. It's quite, I say, straightforward to kind of just look at someone and have a rough idea of how they might want to squat, but there's a lot of other things that come into play. So I think the first thing is just don't worry about what you can or can't squat. I'd say it's first and foremost is what does that squat look like and can it be improved? If so, find someone who knows how to get that looking better, or so just basically find a way of getting your technique sort of first. Things like sleeves, wraps, belts, like they all do help, but they're all kind of a secondary sort of tool I would put in. I would just go absolutely raw, no equipment used. Several sort of screening tests, maybe like ankle mobility would be a good one. Just a lot of the time that dictates, especially with people with maybe like the longer femur lengths, whether or not they'll need to use a shoe with like an elevated heel perhaps. But generally it's going to be technique. It's the same for all three in my opinion, and I think there's not, until that's kind of nailed, there's not really anything else to consider until there's ground to sort of move forward with that solid technique.
I agree. Would you say as well, depending on where you are in terms of like age, experience, weight, that technique could change?
I don't think age really would have any sort of impact on how the technique should or could be. It would probably be more of a case of, let's see, you're always going to want to go in with your strongest type of lift. So let's say it's a low bar squat, for example, and you get, I don't know, let's say you put 50 kilos on it in a year. Your body generally, if your technique's good and your positional aspect of things are relatively good, you shouldn't kind of develop too many issues sort of elsewhere. For example, like the low bar is pretty renowned for putting a lot of strain on the elbows, bicep tendons, the shoulders, across the pecs, and unless your position is becoming an issue as you get stronger, I would say that there would be no real need to change it, as long as it's not a technical issue that's stopping you from progressing.
Right.
The only other thing that would probably be a good idea would be to, again, depending on the person and what might need work, but let's say they're a low bar squatter again, but maybe don't quite activate the quads as much as they would like, or they want more quad work, for example, then I don't know, a high bar squat, a front squat, other squat variations would be good, but generally it's go with what you're strongest with and there's a little bit of a battle against like what can you do comfortably and what can you do more of, but is it potentially going to put more stress on certain parts of the body? Generally finding that sweet spot where you can lift sort of maximal weights without putting any extra stress on any areas, you're winning. But sometimes see it now and then really when people will need to adjust their technique and they can't lift quite as much, but there's a bit more longevity with it.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, recently I changed because I'm not a very big squatter in all fairness, but it's not something that I've really focused on up until recently. If you was to look at my other lifts, it's quite low in comparison. But I think that's a lot of that will be to do with just learning the technique that works best for me. I know I've got very long levers and short torso, so that could have some effect. But I recently changed to a lower bar squat. I always thought that my bar was pretty low, but from actually looking back at some of the videos that I've taken of myself, it's actually quite high. And after having a conversation with Neil and just going through it with him, getting that bar low on the back does feel very, very different and quite restrictive if you're not used to it as well. But then once you've done it a few times, it starts to feel a little bit more natural, I would say.
I think you might have noticed if you follow some of the big heavyweight squatters, a lot of them they'll almost struggle to get their hands in under either side of the collars going low bar, just because of how one, how big they are, I guess, and two, how much of a restrictive position it can place you in. But you can, in my opinion, you can go too low with it, and then I think that's when it becomes, you see a lot of people becoming a little bit too hip dominant with it. Then it becomes a little bit of a good morning. And I think one of the key things is to have kind of like an element of like synchronization between how the hip and the knee are both extending on the way up. I mean, the way down is important as well, but you can kind of get away with not being quite so perfect on the way down. On the way up, I think you're going to kind of just completely fold or tip backwards. If not, so.
Yeah, and as you say, if you're doing it with a technique like that, then it essentially becomes a different exercise completely.
I mean, it's hard for a lot of people who do stuff a certain way for so long, and then they address an issue or they identify an issue, and things have to change quite drastically. It's almost like they know it's bad, but do they keep with it because it's a stronger one, or at which point do things have to balance down and kind of go with what the better one for long run is?
Yeah, and I suppose for a lot of people as well, it's a case of they want it that badly that they're maybe willing to risk the health to some extent in order for them to achieve a certain lift. Saying that, generally the person that's in it for the longest is the one that's the strongest, I would say. Without injury, obviously.
I mean, that's one of the things that I think has made me so particular with my lifting technique, is seeing people along the way who you kind of look at and think, oh, they're probably going to be one of the best in the world at some point. A couple of years in, and they've fallen to pieces. And that's, I know a lot of the time that can just be down to genetic misfortune, and some people have, they just got that genetic makeup to be that good or to be that much better than everyone else. I mean, John Hack for me would be the most obvious example of that. I mean, he just doesn't look like he should be able to shift anywhere near as much weight as he does, and he makes it look ridiculously easy as well. It's
crazy. Yeah,
it's nuts. But yeah, I read something the other day. I can't remember where it was. I think it might have possibly been one of the elite FTS posts. Is talking about injury and powerlifting, and the amount of people that think you will or you're more likely to get injured whilst lifting your max lifts or your 2 or 3 attempts at competition, or the top stuff you'll be lifting. But in reality, that you're so particular about those top lifts that you're so sure that everything's going to be perfect, and unless you make a mistake, everything should be perfect. And it's probably more like the submaximal weights or the warm-ups or the downsets, where you've done the hard stuff or the heavy stuff, let's say, and then people get a little complacent and, I don't know, maybe don't quite put the belt on in the same position, or just it's easily done. But that's probably one of the things that I've done along the way, is just with absolutely everything. You just like 25 kilo bar, like with no plates either side, just my first warm up on squats. I'll treat that like it's 300 odd kilos, and I'll try and move it with as much intent and as much just perfect technique as I can. And the only thing, a few people mention this to me. I think you said something similar at the start there, but it's exactly how it should be, I think. But a lot of people say, they'll see me warm up with like a couple of plates and then up to my top set, and they say everything looks exactly the same. It's just being slowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
And then obviously as it gets up to the top, it's a lot slower, but everything still looks exactly the same, in the same positions.
It's what Ed Cohen says as well, doesn't he? He said like everything is drilled like 1,000 times. Everything's the same. Everything's like from like the setup when you get underneath that bar to the walkout, to the actual lift. Everything is drilled 1,000 times, and the aim is just to get it as perfect as possible, that movement pattern, as perfect as you possibly can make it.
I think that's something.
Sorry,
mate, I was going to say, I think that's just something that can't really be achieved without experience and without practice.